Well, India has become the third largest economy in the world, overtaking Japan. Shweta Rajpal Kohli has more on that. Shweta, how real is this growth?
Well, clearly, if we look at purchase power parity terms and the recent IMF data, that's correct. India has overtaken Japan to become the third largest economy. Let's in fact look at that data. India's GDP in purchasing power parity terms stands at $4.46 trillion. Japan's is a bit lower at $4.44 trillion, which makes India's share in the world GDP in terms of purchase power parity, remember, at 5.65%. Against Japan's 5.63%. In fact, IMF's estimate is that India's share in world GDP in terms of purchase power parity will grow to 8% in the next 5 years. And the good news about the Indian economy doesn't end there. India's exports were up 21% at $303 billion in 2011-12. Imports grew by 32% to $488 billion. But to talk more about the economy, the way forward and the slowing growth, joining me now, CII President Adi Godrej. Mr. Godrej has just taken over as the CII President. Many congratulations, Mr. Godrej, for taking over as the President of the topmost industry chamber, CII. But what's really topmost on your agenda as the CII President?
I think the topmost point on the agenda will be to get growth back into the economy. In fact, that is our theme for the year, revive growth. And we see two ways to do that. Get the reform process going and get governance improved.
So in that sense, will you be voicing your concerns about slowing growth or the lack of reforms and governance to the government?
We had a meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday, and we mentioned to the Prime Minister that the perception, unfortunately, is even worse than the reality. And so we have offered to ensure that industry helps improve the perception, helps create a positive environment, and government should help us do the same. For example, the recent retrospective amendments that have been brought in has created a very negative perception. And it would be good if the government takes that into account and makes the necessary changes so that the perception is positive, perception in foreign investors, perception for Indian investors. We started very well with the repo rate cut. I hope there are more repo rate cuts coming because the very high interest rates have been a major factor in the slowing down of the growth.
That's right, very high interest rates along with the slowdown that we've seen, overall reforms not taking off. But the big worry, Mr. Godrej, is whether reforms can really take off given the government's coalition compulsion, something we keep hearing about all the time, and the kind of opposition that we've seen from allies. Are you even hopeful, or should we just simply give up on reforms, give up that expectation from the government?
Well, we've had regimes which have brought in a lot of reforms under coalition politics. In fact, the first set of reforms in '91 came in a minority government. It wasn't even a coalition majority government. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that major parts of the economic agenda should be above politics. Issue is that we should take quick decisions on important aspects of the economy, and there should be cooperation between the ministries. In many cases, there are so many ministries now, each major issue gets involved with several ministries, that decision-making becomes slow and relatively inefficient. So that process needs to be improved. CII can play a very big part also in taking reform messages to the states, because a lot of the actual GDP growth comes from the state, and if we can help states benchmark the best practices in India, as we have done in some cases, if we can help bring the states to the table on important reforms like the goods and services tax, that can help a lot. For example, in goods and services tax, CII has worked very hard with the states, and I understand we are close to a consensus now, and the likelihood of GST being implemented during this financial year is quite high.
So there is certainly hope that the goods and services tax does take off, and we've seen the industry of late being very vocal about the lack of decision making, as you were mentioning, the problem with regard to too many ministries being involved in decision making. But the sense that one gets really is that the government on its part is in denial of the policy paralysis.
No, I don't think the government is in denial. I think the government realizes the problems. I think it's up to CII to point out to the government what 5, 10, 20 issues, if the government concentrates on, can help growth being restored. And remember, even a simple thing, if the goods and services tax is passed, GDP growth will grow by 1.5 to 2 percentage points, other things being equal. And that itself will create the momentum for further growth. So there are a few things which we need to concentrate on, get them done soon, get the message going. The direct tax code, the manufacturing policy, some of these reforms, if taken forward, can create an ambience which is very different from what we have today. And we've offered to work on this.
But Mr. Godrej, the worry really is, and what's in fact ironical, that the centre, instead of pushing forward reforms, looking at ways of improving growth, seems to be as a dictator right now, asking public sector banks on one hand to cut rates and not even allowing public sector oil firms to raise petrol prices, even though petrol technically is deregulated. What would your message to the government be in such a scenario as the CII president?
Our message is free enterprise should be encouraged, subsidies should be reduced, and if you want to give subsidy for anything, give it directly, not through government companies subsidized. By and large, we need to move to this. This has also been realized in the government, and I'm sure they will move towards that. I don't think it will come overnight. I think it will be difficult, but clearly in this budget, the subsidy to GDP ratio has been pegged, and if they stick to that, clearly they'll find the solutions. And we'll help them find the solutions.
Right, Mr. Godrej, clearly those subsidy projections in the budget seem to be looking more and more unrealistic, at least even right now the government doesn't seem to be moving forward. But overall, a last question to you. Do you think India is really losing the economic fizz, its economic momentum? Are you still hopeful that India can get back on that high growth trajectory that we had seen before the crisis?
No, I'm not hopeful that an optimal solution will be arrived at in a very short period of time, but I'm very confident that we can improve the situation very considerably. 2 or 3 important steps, if taken at the right time, can change the sentiment, and once sentiment changes, other things fall in place. Clearly there are difficulties, clearly there are issues, and clearly there are obstacles. But I'm confident that we will get GDP growth accelerating again in this financial year.
Well, Mr. Godrej, we can certainly hope that the industry and the government work together closely in achieving those objectives. And here's wishing you all the luck in your new role as the CII president. Thanks so much for talking to us. That's all from me on the business desk. It's over to Amitabh for the rest of the news.
Thanks so much, Shweta.